As Christina mentioned, then today's talk I will be largely depending and relying upon the book that I had the pleasure to co-write with a perfect co-author with Giovanna Mascheroni. And this book is really about the various developments we see surrounding us and our children on a present day basis. And mainly in the book, we focus upon datification, but also talk about algorithms, machine learning, and AI, and how these may start to transform various contexts that children inhabit, starting from home, obviously, but then also the processes continue in school, and they also start to affect relationships, so peer relationships and parent-child relationships. And while we were writing this book in the midst of the pandemic, then we were obviously also thinking that this pandemic serves as a really good point in time, in a way, to really start reimagining how we could repurpose data for the social good and for the best interest of the children. So today in the talk, I'm mainly relying upon various practices that lead to the datification of childhood when we think of various parental practices and parental aspects that could really start this datification process. And then I'm also talking about the datification of school in a greater part of the talk, let's say. But in order to start off this discussion, I think it's also important to give you some hints about where we started off when we started writing this book, and which was the point of departure for us, because it also serves as the point of departure here for the present talk. So when we started the book, we really started from the assumption that datification, we argue, really cannot be just simply interpreted as surveillance or some kind of monitoring that is happening of citizens and consumers and through the use of data. But rather we started like theorizing about it as seeing datification as an outcome and as an intensifier of mediatization, similar to the books written by Gouldry and Hebb. But also we argued that we see datification as really becoming very naturalized, both in the citizens' imaginaries, but also in their practices. And this has led to the creation of so-called culture of surveillance, as David Leon puts it. And this culture of surveillance is also so prominent within the culture of today's society that we see that it's really, the data is really starting to colonialize every kind of aspect of our lives and every space that we inhabit. So to develop this slightly further, then, well, what we do see is that really this datification processes, together with the mediatization processes, they have started to constitute for many people the very taken for granted experience, and taken for granted experience and a precondition for social action and precondition for interaction. And later on, when I'm introducing you to some of the practices of parents, you can see how this precondition of data, the importance of having the data before I can take any further steps, for instance, for being a parent, can start to play an important role. And for many people, this has also led to the fact that this kind of watching and being watched has really become a way of life. So this is so naturalized. And we kind of have started to legitimize practices of surveillance, but also self-surveillance, because obviously our phones oftentimes are full of various apps which provide us with new kinds of information, data and graphs and visuals of various aspects about ourselves we previously, before having these technological opportunities, not necessarily knew about ourselves. But all these things have started to develop various imaginaries, and which have in themselves started to make data sharing really desirable, really normative practice. This is what is expected of us. This is something that everybody is doing, and we shouldn't be questioning these kind of practices, because many of those wearables, many of those gadgets, and many of those opportunities technology provides us with help to make our lives so much more convenient. So why shouldn't we double guess of these things? But what we also see is that the data that we start to leave behind, this data has obviously become a very important part in the business model of various service providers and big corporations. For these corporations, this data is crucial. And as we well know, Susanna Zuboff tells about this practice as surveillance capitalism. So this also now leads us to children, because a few years back, the Children's Commissioner within the UK came out with quite a gloomy saying, arguing that yes, we all, adults and children alike, are now datafied, but really children growing up at today's world are the first to be datafied from birth. And since this kind of a saying, we see various scholars starting to talk about this practice more, and starting to really voice quite serious concerns related to it, especially from the viewpoints of children's rights and children's privacy, but also about the ongoing commodification that we see happening within children's lives. And to the extent, and Wilson has been arguing that really this today's world, where children are conceived and raised, they are increasingly monitored and analyzed and really also manipulated through technological processes. And in the book, what we argue there is, we see that this kind of datafication of childhood is actually also further expanded by two simultaneous, but at the same time interdependent developments. And one of them, we say, is related to the mediatization of parenthood. And this is also something that I will touch upon on a greater extent today, because several scholars have been talking about so-called intimate surveillance or carings and data surveillance happening by parents, and in those occasions, oftentimes this kind of caring aspects of parenting are then mingled together with this kind of surveillance aspects of not necessarily always nice surveillance aspects. So this kind of mediatization of parenting, on the one hand, does also consist of two different things. So we can think of parents and their own practices with various media technologies, parents who are obviously the greatest role models to children when we think of media use, and at the same time parents needing to take much more bigger roles when mediating their children's media use and internet use as such. but also parents taking then these various new gadgets, various new apps in order to really like take this role and really be considered as a good and a supportive and caring parent. And the other process which definitely also builds upon this datafication of childhood is the domestication of Internet of Things and its various devices. So we definitely see many people nowadays living in smart buildings and owning smart devices like smart fridges and smart vacuum cleaners, and we have smart doorbells and smart entertainment systems and whatnot. And all these things within our home environment obviously also are dependent on data, and also to start to datafy the household and all those people living in that household. So when we come to the topic of parenting, then what we see is that this kind of parenting anxiety, or parents having anxiety, has not emerged during the last decade, but has been a thing that scholars have noted already some time ago. And some of them have referred to this parental anxiety as a hypervigilance, arguing that like really many parents have tons of fears, tons of insecurities in the context of their children's well-being. And at the same time, many parents also have guilt and are anxious because of the guilt, because they have many work obligations, they need to stay away from their children due to that. And therefore they try to find ways how to really compensate not being able to be together with your child all the time. So what we see is that many parents therefore have reached out to technology in order to compensate these anxieties, in the hopes of compensating those anxieties. And Sun Lim, in also a recent book that came out in 2020, talked about a phenomena referred to as transcendent parenting. And this kind of transcendent parenting she refers to is this constant need of a parent to be always on and always on hand with various digital devices, which enable then the parent to really keep in touch, but also watch over their children, even if they are not physically together. And in her book, she argues that this kind of parenting is starting to be timeless. Like it doesn't matter what else you are doing. If your child is reaching out to you, then you disrupt everything else, and you take this role as a parent. So various scholars have been arguing the fact that really this kind of parental gaze now has become really technologized and dependent on these various technological options. But what this also means is that when we see parenting becoming mediatized and so heavily reliant upon various technologies that are like tend to be promoted as like very caring and focused on sharing and so forth, then they are actually, these parenting practices are actually also becoming very data driven and of course victims of this kind of a surveillance capitalism logic. So well, what we see is that this kind of parent-child relations are also now more than ever turned into data, and they are aggregated and quantifiable and measurable and analyzable, but at the same time also they have become very important sources of economic value for those service providers. So if we think of this kind of a parental surveillance, then obviously this parental surveillance already starts even before the baby is born into this world, similar to the Children's Commissioner's quote from 2018. And obviously, this is not a surprise to anyone, because since the birth of the internet, basically parents to be have like really started to be very actively using various parental forums, various blogs, and just like Googling around the internet in the hopes of sharing their experiences, and basically in order to navigate all these complexities that becoming and being a parent entails. So this kind of internet use for the parents to be is really something that Wilson and Shivers are referred to as the digital mundane. So there is absolutely nothing very original about it. But what happens through these practices where parents often want to share their experiences, these are very important places for them to learn how to be a parent. These places can be seen as pedagogical agents in a way. They are also leaving behind various data traces, and thereby also creating so-called human data assemblages of their children. And this has also led to a phenomena called the generation tagged. So many of the children who born into this world already have some kind of a digital footprint. And obviously this is even more the case with children of micro celebrities, for instance, who start their lives, for instance, through various live birth videos and so forth. So what we see is that many parents have really turned this kind of a sharenting into a global business. And for many parents, this also leads to very considerable monetary gain. For instance, in the US alone, a few years back, there were about 4.5 million mom influencers, which is quite a considerably big number. And all of these parents were then trying to monetize and to create value of their parenting experiences from their living rooms, so to say. But this leads to the practice that at one point their children will inherit digital public's persona and careers, as Crystal Abidin has posted some years ago. And what we do know about the sharenting practice, if we ask from preteens and if we ask from adolescents, then we see that young people are quite oftentimes annoyed about the practice. And they are mainly annoyed by the fact that their parents do not have these talks with the children first. They do not take the children's views into consideration before posting information about their child online, but rather argue that I do not want any harm to my child, and I'm still their parent, so I have a right to decide what kind of information I share about them. But for instance, various studies here in Estonia really reveal that children and adolescents would like to have much more fruitful discussions with parents first on the topic, and to have a say what kind of things are posted about them and what kind of things should be just kept very private and not to be shared with all the followers in social media. But definitely this is not the only case which helps to the datification of childhood from the parent side, we see that very many women have started to use various pregnancy apps in order to track their pregnancies. And depending on the app, there are many different opportunities what kind of information you can upload into the app, starting about the health of the parent, the mother, but also starting to give information about the potential conception date or parents' more intimate thoughts about the pregnancy, but also, for instance, a number of kicks in the womb. So depending on the app, there are many opportunities, what kind of data you can learn about yourself and your child. And in many respects, obviously, the users of these apps say that these are very agentic capacity that these technologies bring to them, because they provide them with information it would be otherwise quite difficult to gain, and at the same time also enable them to develop relationships with their fetuses, which is another aspect they otherwise might not feel that on a black and white app basis, you know. So what we've seen during the COVID times is really that many people, many women, but also future fathers to be started to download this kind of pregnancy and parent to be apps. And downloads really globally went up about 13%. And some people say that, well, this is because we were coerced to be inside and there was an opportunity to be intimate. But I would say it's also because of the fact that many pregnant women didn't have enough opportunities to visit their doctors, and there was not enough opportunity for proper health care. And therefore, pregnant women started to rely on these apps and the information these apps provide in order to make some decisions about their health and the health of the baby. But what we see is that not always these apps are actually providing truthful information. And one of the problems is that there is no agency, no organization in the world who has actually an opportunity and responsibility to take a look at those apps and the information they provide and the information they also take from the users. So so they are not viewed as medical apps, but rather as something sometimes even like entertainment and well-being related, but nobody is really taking any responsibility of those technologies. And what we see, therefore, is that this kind of good parenting practice has really become in a way also technical exercise. And Jill says that this is something you can get either right or wrong. And on the one hand, yes, there are some competencies you can learn from seeing the other people's experiences, some things you can learn from the apps, but then many of those things seem to be related to the things you purchase, things you consume. And obviously also various companies, for instance, Target here, have started to really see and make predictions about who is going to be pregnant and to whom we can again offer various services and products. Target in 2012 became very notorious for creating a pregnancy prediction score. So those of you who like lotions that do not have any concrete smell, those people, for instance, were the ones that were considered to be pregnant or hoping to be pregnant. So strange little things from your everyday shopping habits can start to make an effect in someone's eyes, leading to the creation of a prediction score about your potentially being pregnant. So yeah, we see this kind of commodification of the lived experiences of expectant parents, but obviously also the exploitation of the data flows of the unborn, as Veronica Barassi was talking about in her recent book as well that came out 2020. What we also learned from looking at those various pregnancy apps, which are very popular in various countries around the world, is that we really see that they are not just keeping the information you provide within the app private, but rather quite many of them are sharing this data with various advertisers. And for instance, Ovia App also shared this information with employers and the insurance companies. So this kind of use may start to affect your employment opportunities and at some point. And especially this is the case within the US in the context of employment and in context of health insurance. So it very much starts to affect what kind of data there is that your employers can access. But obviously, this kind of intimate surveillance doesn't stop there. So when the child is born, many first-time parents especially are really dependent on someone to tell me how this parenting actually works. And when my parents were young, I remember we had like a huge book on the bookshelf where it taught about how to parent a newborn. But now you do not really need a book. Who has time to read a book when you have a newborn at home? So it's much more easy to really make use of various smart gadgets. And there are so many of those. For instance, Pampers has really diapers which notify your on your phone when your baby has peed in the diaper. There are so many different gadgets which are focused upon health that measure the temperature of your child or any other various medical potential conditions they might have. There are smart cribs that use AI in order to predict when your baby might wake up. And there are smart lamps that make use of various research around the world in the hopes of predicting why your baby is crying. So is it a cry that they are hungry, or is it a cry related to the fact that they have peed in the diaper? So all these things tell you that. And isn't it just marvelous? But what we see obviously again is that this is a huge business opportunity for baby tech. Although this is quite a fresh market, they have been booming during the last few years and continued to grow. And what we also notice when we look at how they promote their things is that they have quite an aggressive marketing jargon, and quite often it is also emphasized that they try to stimulate unnecessary fear and also self-doubt in parents about their abilities actually to take care of the child. And in many respects, then this kind of baby tech industry is really trying to sell the promise to the parents that that if you use these devices, if you make use of our apps, you'll definitely become a better and much more relaxed parent, because these are so-called empowering technologies, and you really can take control of your baby and their health and their well-being. And Also, my good colleagues here, Holloway, Mascheroni, and English have talked about all this kind of baby wearables and gadgets as a perfect example of so-called neoliberal gendered responsibilization discourse, that all these things send notifications on your phone. They send nudges on your phone, and then they kind of nudge you to react upon them. So not just react upon your own gut feeling, but really react upon this kind of data that seems to be very accurate and truthful. So we see so-called devicification of mothering happening in this sphere. And obviously, this also is related to the datification of happening within our homes. As I mentioned earlier, that the devices do not stop there with this particular devices meant for just young babies, but there are many other things that all collect information. And basically, this information could be referred to as home life data. And this data is really very different kinds of data, starting with household data and various biometric data, ending with situational and family data. So all these gadgets that help to make your lives smoother and more convenient also take quite a big bit of your privacy, even without you recognizing it or noticing it. But obviously, when the children are growing older, the anxieties of parents do not stop there. And through recent years, we have seen that many parents have become dependent on making use of various tracking devices, which help to keep an eye on their children when they are not physically together. And all these gadgets and all these smart apps provide the parents with different kinds of information. So they can give, for instance, the transit speed of the child, but they can also provide a geofencing option so that the parent can really make the app work so that the child can only move in a very concrete area of the town and cannot go outside of that specific area without the gadget informing the parent about it. And again, the marketing discourse is related to these gadgets. Argue that these gadgets want to make the world a better and definitely a safer place for the children. And through the years, we see that people are starting to make use of these tracking devices on a greater basis. Here in Estonia, the same EU Kids online study shows that 22% of the parents who participated in EU Kids online study in 2018 said that they were making use of such devices. The European average, as you see, is slightly lower. But considering the amount and sheer variety of this kind of apps, so we can only see that they will just keep on growing in their popularity. And rather than relying on phone apps or some gadgets, these kind of tracking devices have become really smart and really also creepy and sneaky. So they are oftentimes invisible. So for instance, this beautiful and cute teddy bear t-shirt that my child is wearing, they might not have any idea that this teddy bear is actually tracking them when they go to school, or that they have an invisible belt on their trousers. And sometimes parents also are concerned about the fact that the child might get lost on the streets. So now you can also buy some very smart shoes to the child, which together with the help of Google Maps keeps your child on the very right track. And if your child starts to turn right when they should be turning left, the shoe starts to notify the child so they wouldn't get lost. But again, all this information goes both ways. And in addition to just tracking the child, there are also, especially in the US, various school bus tracking apps or driver tracking apps for teenage drivers when parents are concerned about how well they are doing. And especially in those occasions, we can see how, again, this surveillance capitalism has creeped into the system, that if the app shows that you are really a good driver, then you can get a better rate for your car insurance and so forth. What we have done here in Estonia is also, together with my doctoral student Marit Sukk, we carried out a Q methodology study and interviews with parents who make use of this kind of tracking devices, and also made a similar study with the children who were preteens and were aware of that practice. And from that study, we see that 3 types of parents emerged. And the first type of parents are really very trusting parents. They trust the tracking apps, they trust the data, they see it, and they also believe that they have every right to control their children, and they do not think that this kind of tracking anyhow limits children's privacy or personal freedom. Then we see cautious parents who kind of have doubts about the use of this kind of apps, because they do know that they might offer not so clear security, but still they also do believe in children's autonomy, but still think that parent has a right to control their children and keep on using those apps because of that. And then we have careful authoritarian parents who also have doubts about these tracking apps, and also kind of realize that these marketers are playing on the parents' fears, but at the same time they believe that parents have a right to have extensive control over their children. And also the main problem is that they do not really trust their children. So they tend to trust the data that these devices generate. As for the preteens views, we actually also found 3 times of reactions from there. And we see that all those 3 types, they are quite okay with the tracking. The compliant child here is totally at ease with tracking and really very compliant in every way, because they think that children have to do whatever their parents say, and that's that. At the same time, even the compliant child says that tracking needs to be discussed in the family, so you cannot do it sneakily behind their back. And when we look at the privacy sensitive child here, they are even also not against the tracking as such, although they have reservations about it. But still, again, they think that parents shouldn't use these devices in secret. And they also say that if children really want, they can also avoid this kind of tracking, and they can come up with ways how to maneuver around it. And what is problematic perhaps in the context of this privacy sensitive child is that what we see is that they do not really take responsibility of their own safety and well-being. They really think that this is now the parents' agenda, this is their role. And if the parent is using these tracking devices, then they are totally in charge, and they do not really think themselves how to be more careful and preserve the safety as such. So what this also leads to is that we really see that this kind of datafication of children is premised on emerging social expectations and kind of also shared norms around parenthood, that many parents are really encouraged to conform this normative pattern of digital parenting because they believe this is the constructed norm of good parenting. And many of them really trust the data that all these devices and apps provide them with, because this data tends to be, or they believe it is, objective and reliable in comparison to the very subjective and deceptive self-knowledge, for instance. So obviously this also starts to reform what parenting is all about and what parental roles are all about. But now we have to say a few words also about the datafication of education, because this is also a topic that has been very swiftly developing during the last few years, and obviously also again due to the pandemic. When again these various educational technology startups and companies have really earned a lot of profit and continue to do so. Although these discussions we have been having about technology and its revolutionary power, so to say, are not recent at all, but have been going on for quite some time. And many authors are arguing against, arguing that really technology can be this powerful source that provides us with very personalized education and all the other good things that we can think about. But what we see, especially now during the pandemic times, is that in many schools, in many countries all around the world, we have become very dependent on the services of companies and services of platforms, which in themselves are built on, as Kuchikova says, Netflix-inspired commercial model. So, so again, this kind of datafication of education is not a philanthropic goal these companies have, but rather this is something they do in order to earn profit. And what we see is that there is really so-called biopolitical management of students going around in various countries all over the world, and especially through various biometric technologies, children's physical and behavioral characteristics are what is being collected, and this could be seen as a very liquid biopower in action. And in many schools, we see fingerprint readers and facial recognition software and palm vein scanners and voice biometrics and whatnot. Although, for instance, in the EU, we would argue that GDPR should prohibit all these kind of things, but it's not really always that well functioning currently. And we see how this personal information then of students is very vigorously harvested for a multitude of reasons, especially in the context of student attendance, in the context of academic performance, but also, for instance, in the context of their mental health. We now, during the last few years, have heard that schools are monitoring social media through AI of students' social media in order to see any hints about depression or mental health problems among students. And in many occasions, all these technologies are built upon, again, to monitor so-called personal risk scores that are provided to each student. And again, the hope is that if we use these technologies, the school, the teacher, parents, and whoever, they can intervene before real problem arise. But the problem here, again, is that these technologies are not really reliable. And currently, we do not have any research that would confirm that, yes, these things are all working. So again, this leads to quite big problems in the context of children's rights and children's privacy. And during the COVID times, we saw, obviously, also how various facial recognition software was being used for various reasons. For instance, for controlling student integrity during online exams and tests, and all kinds of proctoring software was used. And for instance, in the US, students in universities were very angrily arguing against such an invasion in their privacy. But in Europe, there hasn't been any discussion about it, or the discussion has been very small. And what we also notice is that there is a growing interest in so-called affective computing. And this affective computing is mainly interested in monitoring and collecting students' physiological data in order to survey so-called the engagement in learning. For instance, in China, in some schools, students, as you see here on the picture, are using headbands, and the headbands are then scanning the brain waves. If the light is green, it means that the brain is functioning and the student is engaged in learning. If the light is red, then, well, we have a problem and teacher should then intervene. But again, these technologies are not tested. They are not, we do not know that they actually function as they are promoted and said that they should function. And what we also see that there are many developments with facial analysis and machine vision algorithms, which are used in order to detect facial microexpression states on the faces of students. And these microexpression states, again, would provide the teacher with fruitful information about boredom or any other emotions that the student is undergoing, and the teacher can then react upon it and take steps. But again, none of these technologies have really been found useful, and we do not know if they are actually working. And what this also leads us to is that we are in the schools also living in the era of learning analytics. And this might be interpreted so that only the learning that the data makes visible is considered learning. And all that information which is not quantified, which cannot be measured, which cannot be compared to anything else, then it cannot be considered learning, and thus is also marginalized. And we do not know if this is actually what we want. What we also see is that the work of teachers has started to change very rapidly, and it has developed into something which we can say is really data managed. That teachers are starting to lose their autonomy, and their expertise is also seriously minimized, because they need to make the pedagogical decisions dependent on the data that these technologies provide them with. And the same aspect that the autonomy and expertise of the teacher becomes minimized, for instance, happened in 2020 in August in UK related to A-level exam grading fiasco, when basically the Ministry of Education within the UK decided that teachers are two subjective beings, and they shouldn't be grading or giving grades to the students who were unable to sit their final exams due to the pandemic, so that the grade had to be decided based on the previous grades that they had already received during the term. But teachers were considered to be unreliable to make good decisions. So the ministry really came up with an algorithm to do that. And it kind of ended with a fiasco, and students rioting basically on the streets because the algorithm didn't do the job right. And in order to progress and develop you into, let's say, perhaps also gloomy views of where the education is going due to datafication, we see really growing uptake of biopedagogies, psychopedagogies, and neuropedagogies, but also the growing interest of educational genomics, which means that human genome data and educational neuroscience are working together hand in hand in the hopes of developing very personalized so-called precision education. So what this might mean is that in the future, everyone could really apply on a very tailor-made curricula that is provided based on the student's DNA profile. So all this means that basically we see children and young people classified and identified as measurable types. They are turned into data templates, and they are assigned this on the correspondence of the personal and behavioral data, and also with pre-identified algorithmic models. And what we see is that this process of algorithmic identification means that online a child is according to how closely the data really stacks upon the pre-existing categories of children, meaning that children are really categorized according to the data they themselves, or in the case I have relied upon parents and carers, but also teachers, for instance, produce. And all this kind of data can follow young people into adulthood and start to affect the access to education and employment and healthcare, financial services, and all the other different services that are really crucial for their lives. So what we see happening around us is kind of pervasive diffusion of the imaginary of dataism, with its imperatives of data collection and connectivity and transparency, and also the discourses of inevitability and personalization. All this embeds children into ever-intensifying networks of surveillance, for which they really become these calculable persons, but subject then to calculations that are performed by others. And what we see is that obviously this kind of datafication can create various opportunities, and I haven't really focused upon those here today, but opportunities for learning and social inclusion and civic and political empowerment, but this can also lead to discrimination and exclusion and marginalization that we really do not want to see happening. So we argue together with Giovanna in the book that really by rendering children's bodies and qualities and their behaviors into this kind of digital data, the young people are turned into data subjects who are not only positioned with partial and so-called reductionist data templates, with a possibility that really the complexities and potentialities and opportunities may be circumscribed, but they are also represented and spoken for in ways they cannot understand and they also cannot control. And what we also see is that this increasingly prevalent data valence that is happening in our homes, in schools, in workplaces, and everywhere, this also involves much more than a threat to young people's privacy. And what we argue in the book is that what is actually at stake is the future of human agency, and also then ultimately of society and culture. In the context of these material practices and infrastructures of automation and also algorithmic governance. And definitely what we see is the need to focus on providing young people with much more adequate knowledge and skills how to enhance their data and code and algorithmic literacies, so as to enable to know much more about these practices and also so as to be more knowledgeable how these processes can actually affect their everyday lives to a much more larger extent than we currently acknowledge or want to know about. So with that, I stop here and thank you.
Thank you so much, Andra. Thank you so much for your brilliant presentation. So interesting, so challenging, so visual. And thank you also for allowing us to record this great moment. I'm very, very happy to have this opportunity and to share. And I'm sure that I'm seeing here in the chat, you have several comments and questions that Patricia will present. And first of all, it's so well done that we see, and when you recall the title of your presentation, Datafied childhoods and the normalization of surveillance, we see from parents to education how this technological environment has implications in the everyday life, and at some time. At the same time, you and Giovanna in the book, and as you presented here, you avoid just a single look at this situation. You don't forget to look at the opportunities and the challenges, the positive challenges that this technological environment promotes in terms of identity building and other processes. But you show in a very clear way that parenthood, education, and childhood and media are interrelated, and we cannot ignore this. So I will give the floor to Patricia to introduce the questions and comments that are now running a lot. So the first question is this one. Sometimes so for reading, and this question came, I think, from my colleague Teresa from the Innova. She is a researcher that is very sensitive to this point of culture. So if you want to comment, to answer to this question, and we after we move to the other one.
Yeah, thank you for this question. And obviously, I totally agree that everything related to datafication is very culture specific and should be also interpreted in that particular context, because parenting practices are very different. So in the book, we make use of various research that we ourselves have conducted. I here in Estonia and Giovanna in Italy, but also through various other networks that we inhabit, for instance, UKids Online. But what we see definitely in the context of datafication and empirical studies related to that is that the empirical studies only start to emerge. So it's still quite a fresh field. And if we look at the empirical studies, then we can see some studies from the context of US and some from Australia and UK, mainly from the English speaking world, as obviously oftentimes happens. So we definitely need much more insights from different cultural backgrounds in order to say anything much more specific, and also to say how these practices actually differ and parents' opinions differ, because currently we are mainly relying on the English speaking world or the Western world. And the examples in the book are also mainly from that particular region and from these kind of particular studies. So I would just say that just in addition to theorizing about it and like saying that there's always just doom and gloom, we actually need to study the field much more and to study the real life practices of parents and children and get their views on it. And this is what we should be doing for the next few years at least.
Thank you. Another question, Patricia, could you move the slide? Another question.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with this, that there is a need to incorporate child's rights perspective into all of this. And again, we see developments in this field, but these developments are slow, as everything related to policy unfortunately is. But we have a huge milestone from the last year when it was adopted that digital rights of the child, and especially Professor Sonia Livingstone has done a great deal of work in order to make these important steps in the field of policy and legal frameworks. So I'm let's say hopeful that we will see developments in this field during the next few years. But obviously, again, there is a lot of resistance from the companies and service provider side. So again, this might turn into a long battle, but there are developments there, and there are many people working on it. So hopefully we will see results not sooner than later. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question?
Oh, yeah. Well, European community is really trying its hardest to put on strains to these big companies. Um, well, again, similar to the previous question, I would say it will take some time before we really come to see the effects of these things. And well, I know that especially policy developments within the UK are the developments that many around the world are taking as exemplary examples of how we should proceed in the context of digital rights of the child. So currently, I would say all these communities like Google and Meta, they will fight against paying all those fines, but at one point, policy will prevail. I'm hopeful.
Mm-hmm. To focus on economics and politics.
Yeah, well, definitely, it makes it is much more difficult for EU to force these things on companies that have been built in the context and in reliance to the policy and legislative frameworks of US and China is a totally different world in that respect. So as we see this, again, these developments are not quick, and this definitely comes from the fact that these different countries have so different understanding of what privacy means and how these issues should be handled on a legislative level.
Mm-hmm. You see, Andra, that the questions don't stop, but we will finish at 8. But if you could answer to more to this.
Yeah, this is also a very good question, but also a very tricky one. Like, how can really we protect children if they even do not know that there is any data about them? And again, if we do know that in Google you can also ask various content about yourself to be removed, but this is a terribly long process, and in that respect, all these big companies are not making it really very smooth, and for ordinary user really to take any steps in this regard is very difficult. So again, I do not want to put all the strains and all the responsibilities on the shoulders of the individual child. I know I ended with saying that we need to enhance the data literacy and algorithmic literacy and all that, but this is not the individual fight that we can really win only with this kind of literacy tools. We definitely need policy that could help us in this respect. We definitely need to see also changes in the mindset of these big companies. And this isn't a fight an ordinary child or parent or teacher can win that easily. So we really need also countries to work on together on this on a much wider scale. But yeah, working together on this takes time, and again is a long process.
Mm-hmm. Patricia is saying that this is the last question. Oh,
we have another question. I think is a good way to finish this talk. So I'm gonna put it here in a minute.
yeah.
Or we can read it here if it's easier.
It's on the chat.
Yeah. It's from David.
Ah.
So what can we anticipate for the evolution of digital humanity? Oh, wow. That's a really big question. Well, what we already see is that many people are starting to have very positive thoughts about human enhancement through technologies. And also here in Estonia, for instance, we have a bunch of people who have microchips in their hand that enable them to, I don't know, pay in cafes and open doors and use the elevator and such. And we see various surveys and predictions about the future workforce, let's say in 2030, say that many people are considering implanting their brains with some microchips if they will give them additional powers and some new opportunities on the workforce, for instance. So I would say that we are not seeing these kind of developments disappear anytime soon. Many people are really dependent on technologies, and we see this millennial generation growing up and being very favorably minded about the technologies and about the data that these technologies provide them. So I would say that yeah, humanity is trying to really make use of the technology in a very techno-optimistic way without really considering the potential harms and potential risks. And I would say this is also part of our job as researchers and scholars to really keep this discussion going and say that this isn't just about convenience. This isn't just about making your life much more fun and smoother in many ways, but we need to keep in mind that there are potential threats that we might want to experience. So yeah, there are many things to come, I'm sure. This will not go away anytime soon.
Andra, your presentation is the first one of a series of talks, and you put so many questions on the table that will be a comment by other people, by other participants, by other researchers. And as you said, this horizon of life is complicated. The techno-optimistic, the view that technology is let's say the brilliant side of the technology is stronger than the risk side of technology. So this is really a great opening for this series of talks, and I will give the screen. Thank you again, Andra, very, very much. I imagine that in Estonia is around 10 p.m. So thank you for the time that you spent here together. And Anna Viseu introduce the next speaker. Next month in February, we will be here again with Lauren Bridge.
So first, Andra, thank you so much. This was fantastic, and actually, I think the best introduction to what's coming next, because a lot of the issues that you brought up will be brought up by other speakers, including, for example, Lauren Bridges, who is going to talk to us about something that you mentioned by name, the Ring bell that is being developed by Amazon. Lauren Bridges is a doctoral student at UPenn. She is doing absolutely fantastic field work, kind of investigating the materiality and the power and the reach of Amazon. And so she'll come to talk to us about the Ring bell that you can buy off Amazon, that actually then takes images of you, puts them on social media and how and those are then used by police. And it will be really interesting to see her thinking about how that changes the whole notion of surveillance. And as Andra said, this is all being done, under the guise of safety and convenience. So I think for those of you who are interested, I mean, Amazon is one of the big tech, the big giants, and I think examining their work will be an amazing opportunity. And this is in February, same time and same place. So thank you. And yes, the slides, I mean, this talk will be available on our site. So Andra's communication will be available on our site, not immediately because we have to edit it a bit, but it will be placed there.
So it's my time to make an end of this first talk. And again, thank you to Andra and to all the participants. We have here people from Portugal, from Brazil, from other English countries. So we have an international audience and a very active audience, Spain. So it's a fantastic moment, and we will be here next month and along this year, and we hope that these comments and these debates, as I told you, it's our aim to make this available in Portuguese. So we will write some summaries of these presentations in order to contribute to call the public attention to these issues of living in a datafied world. Thank you all, and see you next month with Laura Bridge. Thank you.